Hello, it's your local idiot again. Same day as the last post, just a tiny bit later. I had a little tiny thought. I thought I'd share it with you. Sorry about that. Um, sorry, the sun's being crazy, but hey, the good news is there's some sun. Um, hmm. So anyway, have you noticed on TikTok? See, I post these. This is Ginger Billy, by the way, in case you wanted to know, because he apparently wants to be represented on this particular post. I post things on TikTok, and I also post pretty much the same exact stuff on YouTube. So, but TikTok, and I've been kind of switching more to YouTube just because I know TikTok's going to be ending in the United States in January. So there's that. Um, but I've been getting 8 million, like follows and requests basically for to follow other people that are supposedly famous, right? Like everybody. I mean, Meryl Streep and Shania Twain is one that and I'm not a Shania Twain fan, but I've gotten 1 million requests for me to follow her, and so she's requested several times today, and also Jodie Foster, which it'd be neat if I could just hang out with some of these people, but their Twitter feeds are bogus. Elon Musk is apparently a giant fan of mine, right? So I was chatting with Elon Musk yesterday, and I told him in this several times that I knew he wasn't Elon Musk. But if you wanted to chat, that'd be fine. And so I said, "Well, where are you?" And he's like, "Or where are you from?" And he told me where Elon Musk is really from in South Africa and all this kind of stuff. So he would not break character. But the stuff he was typing was ridiculous. Clearly, somebody who does not have a mastery of the English language, and I don't even know if they're intellectually 100% type of thing, by some of the things they were saying. So I'm only assuming, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that they don't exactly understand the language they're using, because some of the stuff they were saying are pretty dumb. Um, but I mean, I guess on TikTok, don't they? Isn't there some kind of a way for people to vet? I mean, don't I know any of the platforms that I use, or that I don't really use most of them anymore. I'm on TikTok and YouTube, and I got rid of my Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of stuff just because of the drama around the stupid election crap. And it's so not even just the election stuff, but like uh, the far right and the far left people, and the people that are being the most nutty are the far right people, and they just say the dumbest things. Sometimes that stuff's entertaining, but once in a while they somebody says just the right thing to draw me in, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm trying to clear up something that they may never have had explained to them. I mean, it sounds dumb like that. I'm really condescending to them, but some of the things they say are just so stupid. I'm like, you know, how did you not know this before? Or who, I don't know. It's just a natural thing for me to want to help people, I guess. If somebody was broke down on the side of the road, I'm one of those people that would pull over, and help them out. Um, and social media is not made for people like me. And so I killed those things so I could just stop stressing. And it actually, I will say this. I had Facebook, for years and years and years, and always thought about getting rid of it once it started getting weird. And sure enough, it didn't do it. And finally, I've done it, and it has been nothing but a relief. I have not spent one day. My wife, she's on it still, of course, and she's constantly doing this. Oh, have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? And I'm like, no, I'm not on Facebook. Is there something important? Let me know. And I watch news. I get my news from NPR mostly on the radio. Like, I drive for a living right now, and so I see NPR all the time, or I hear NPR all the time. And occasionally I'll check out MSNBC, online or whatever. But news agencies have gotten really funky. I mean, I've even been disappointed lately with, or for the last, I don't know, year or so with CNN, only because I lean way more to the where they're at than I'm not a Republican or Democrat or anything, but I used to consider myself kind of a centrist, but the goalposts got moved on me, so I stayed where I'm at, and everything's moved. So now um, the left is sort of more in my realm, and the right is just something I can't possibly stomach anymore. They're no longer the party of the 80s. You know, I mean, 80s is when I started noticing politics. You know, I was born in 68, so um, and I grew up in the Ronald Reagan era. You know, I remember when I was in the fourth grade when I don't know, fifth grade, I think, maybe sixth grade, when Ronald Reagan got shot. Um, and I remember the controversy. I mean, MTV back then, well, there was even video, you know, like music videos depicting Ronald Reagan and stuff like this as a bad man, that kind of stuff. And he did some stupid stuff, but there was also some brilliant things that he did. He played chess with the Soviet Union and won. Um, and I grew up in the Cold War era. My dad was a submarine sailor during the Cold War, and the boat that he was last assigned to was sunk, and 99 men were killed by a Soviet submarine, and it's been proven. It's still top secret in the U.S. Navy, which is weird enough, but it's been proven by other corroborating people that defected to the U.S. from the Soviet Union, and then they gave varying stories from their perspective, and how the information, this top secret information, was gotten to the Soviet Union to that compromised the location of the Scorpion. And so this, and when I was in basic training, um, our primary concern was the Soviet Union. And I was in basic training in 1986, June of '86, and in our barracks, on a wall during we were on the third floor of a barracks, and that was where our platoon was. But on the way down the stairs, there was on one of the sets of stairs there was a mural of two soldiers, an American soldier that was really clearly made so that anybody could see that it was an American soldier, uh, fighting a Russian soldier, and it was very clearly a depiction of in Rocky whatever 27, where Dolph Lundgren was the Soviet, whatever, where he had the blonde crew cut and chiseled face and all that kind of stuff, and on his name tag it said Ivan, and of course the American soldier was burying a K-bar in his gut during this fight in the picture, and so I grew up in the Cold War, and I was trained in the military during the Cold War. Um, I had a top secret clearance because I was in a communications unit, and my MOS was called 31 November, which was a tactical circuit controller, and of the whole signal node, if you know anything about that, which is like a big group of people out in the field, out in the supposedly in combat, in various trucks doing various things. My truck, they had back in the day. This is before digital was really prevalent, at least in the military, and at that time, uh, we were still pretty analog and in the middle of transitioning, you know. But there was an actual switch panel, which was one of the vehicles, one of the jobs, and they would actually use the old plug-in cords like you see in old movies or something of what a switchboard looked like. And my job was to listen to all these transmissions going from, like infantrymen to artillerymen, from the command post, where some field general or whatever was commanding some colonel someplace who was then commanding some squad out in the field where some lieutenant was talking to a guy on the phone or on the radio, and my job was to listen to all those signals. In the military, in the Army anyway, there's always two jobs. There's the peacetime job, then there's the combat job. That was my combat job, where that I would listen to the signal on each one of those transmissions, those kinds of, those conversations that were happening. And if there was a problem with the transmission, then I would start using, an oscilloscope and things like that, and determine what the problem was, whether it was an equipment problem, because if there was an equipment problem, there was one or two places it could be, and then I would get a hold of the people that were responsible for that equipment and tell them to square their shit away. Or it could be not necessarily a radio, but it could be a hard line back then. People we called cable dogs. That was a whole other job in the signal node, where that they would run these little bitty wires that looked like stereo wires, but they would run them sometimes for miles. And so sometimes we'd have to call cable dogs and say, you got a problem with your wire, someplace, and I would give them an idea of where this was. Now that was my combat job. And the idea is we'd always be somewhere right close to the enemy line, right, the front line, and we were just making sure that the jets going overhead could talk to the infantrymen on the that were out there in the shit, and that the infantrymen could talk to the artillerymen so they could put their steel on targets, and stuff like that, and make sure that the command post could talk to all those people and stuff. And so I had to have a top secret clearance because I also had access to one of the vans in the signal node called the encryption van, and they had what they called K cards, and those cards were full of software. And before it was even software, it was some kind of a mechanical device, but it was a code, and at the time the Soviets wanted that shit, and because that kind of stuff changed all the time. They called them K cards because they could pull them out and put another one in there at a moment's notice. And so a signal could be sent from one location, it would go through encryption, and then it would arrive at another location, and it would have a code. And at some point they would pull that code out, and they would put another code in, another K card in, and the code would be different. So the Soviets wanted that information, and that was one of the biggest reasons I had to have a top secret clearance. The other thing was that you never knew what the command tent was saying. They might be saying some really important shit they didn't want people to know about, and I had the ability to listen to everybody without them knowing. So we had to have a good clearance. But now I can't remember what the point of me telling you I had a top secret clearance was. That's one of the fucked up things about getting older. Like, for instance, diabetes. I have type 2 diabetes from being a fat ass. And which means basically I maxed out my pancreas's ability to create insulin, or its desire to create insulin, by putting so much sugar into my system over time. Probably, I'm sure ever since I was a baby, if I made noise, my mom probably put a sucker or something in my mouth. But diabetes can kill you will kill you. It's a fatal disease. Diabetes will kill you in one of two ways. There's no other ways for it to do it. And these are the two ways. One, if you have to adjust your glucose level in your blood with insulin, it is possible to take too much insulin, and your body goes below a certain threshold, and you have to measure your insulin all the time. But if you fail to measure your insulin, and your body goes below a certain threshold, supposedly you can pass out and just never wake up. And that happens. That's a lot. That's common. Now that's called hypoglycemia. And my particular insulin, though, never goes that direction. It always goes way too high. So that kills you in the other way. The other way, so some people are naturally hypoglycemic, they're diabetic, but they have to fight their bodies not having enough glucose in their bloodstream. And so they have to monitor their system. You hear about people that are diabetic and they've got to eat an orange real fast, or they've got to, get a piece of candy like Paul Blart, the mall cop. And that's because they're hypoglycemic. If you get too low on insulin, or too low on glucose in your blood, which is sugar, you will pass out. You will go to sleep. It'll just feel like you're tired and you want to go to sleep. And then as you sleep, your body system will slowly shut down one organ at a time until you're done, which, like I said, is pretty common. The second way, which I think is the most common way for people to die from diabetes, is stroke or aneurysm. And the whole reason for that is that sugar, the insulin that your pancreas makes, the only function your pancreas has is to make insulin to break down the sugar molecules in your bloodstream, because sugar molecules are too large and destructive to get through the itty bitty little capillaries. And when I say capillaries, I mean you basically have a hard time. They're like the size of a hair or smaller. You have a hard time seeing them with your naked eye even. But it affects your eyes, because in the back of your eyes, I don't know if you've ever seen an eye scan, but there's lots of these little capillaries back there, and in your brain, filled with basically microscopic capillaries that has to get blood to those places. Without the blood cells, everything in your body would die, except for your bones, I think, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, your toes, your feet, lots of little anywhere there's lots of nerves is another place where there's lots of little capillaries. And your fingers. So whenever you hear about somebody, having to have their feet cut off or whatever, it's because over the years they have not paid attention to their diabetes. They have not done anything when they notice the symptoms of diabetes or whatever. And in my job, I see people with missing limbs and stuff all the time, simply because they basically said it's not worth the bother. I'm not going to mess with it. And eventually it kills them. But the most common way it kills them is those. So insulin, that's what insulin does. Insulin, literally, its only job is to break down sugar molecules. And sugar, if you would imagine what a sugar molecule looks like, just imagine a little dot, like a little ball, like a little BB, and it's got two little sticks coming off of it, and there's two littler BBs attached to the end of those sticks. So it sort of looks like a rabbit face, with the two long ears or whatever. Now imagine that little thing can't get through some really, really fine blood vessels. So the insulin comes along and it breaks those sticks and it makes it into a smaller thing. So that's a really, really, really simplistic way to imagine insulin breaking down sugar molecules. But it has to happen or it will kill you eventually. And so those sugar molecules can't get around corners and stuff in those little capillaries. It scars the walls up. And eventually, you either get an aneurysm, which is one of those little blood vessels burst, or those blood vessels get clogged up, and that's a stroke. If it's in your brain, like I say, your brain has the vast majority of your brain and all of the brain function is fed by those little capillaries. So, when my mom died, she had she did not have Alzheimer's, but she had dementia, because she was one of those people that basically ignored her diabetes for so long that she had a zillion little strokes in her brain. I saw it wasn't an X-ray because that's not fine enough. I saw an MRI. Or maybe it was a CAT scan, I don't remember now. But anyway, the picture of her brain looked like somebody shot it with a shotgun. It was like zillions of little dots all over the place in the brain. And each one of those were little dead spots from miniature strokes. And that's how, not Alzheimer's, but that's how the other form of dementia takes somebody that's a really smart person, really good judgment, knows a lot of stuff. I mean, you could be a genius, and you could be reduced to, the intelligence of a house cat or a rabbit or whatever, a 2-year-old, if you're lucky. because of parts of your brain and places that filter your you no longer have common sense. You no longer have the ability to know what you should or shouldn't do in society and stuff like this. And uh, I mean, the study of well, psychology, where they talk about how people with certain brain injuries uh, do certain things depending on where they got hurt. Uh, then they suddenly know how that part of the brain works or whatever. That's what, and then eventually that kills you. That's called a vascular dementia. And so when you have diabetes, you either are looking forward to dying the normal way, which is like a heart attack or something like that, if you're lucky, or you get to have dementia, and eventually it hits a place in your brain that is really important to your survival. I mean, there are places in your brain that run your heart. You don't get a choice about it; it just works. There's a place in your brain that runs your breathing. You don't get a choice about it; it just works. And there's all kinds of other bodily functions that you don't even think about. They just work, and the only reason you exist is because of those things. And if you have a mini stroke in that area and it kills that part of your brain, it kills you. And that's just how it is. I've heard of people just literally, you know, not having to go through dementia, but one of the first places that gets ruined isn't a place that affects your common sense or your ability to remember or whatever. It's a thing like your heart, and suddenly, and I always love the description that people give. They're walking along and they just suddenly died. And I've heard that many times, but what it means is the mini stroke that they just had, or the aneurysm that they just had, which effectively is the same thing, because what it is you have a blood vessel. It's a highway to get blood cells to those places which feed those areas. And if the blood vessel bursts, the highway is then cut off, and then whatever that area was ahead of that where it was getting fed, it dies. Same thing with a stroke. If it gets clogged up and the blood vessel or the blood cells can't get through, that area dies. And so if you're unlucky enough that, well, I don't know how, maybe lucky, where that it's a really important basic function like your heart or your breathing or something like that, you just cease to be, you know. And other people get and back in the day, people thought that everybody went senile when they got to a certain age, and that's just not true. So if you're lucky enough to know that you're a diabetic, take care of that shit, because I promise you, if you don't, it'll be worse than what you think. You won't just die. You'll get tortured for a while. My mom never lost any limbs or anything like that, which is pretty amazing timing wise, because she took care of it, or she had it late enough to where that when she stopped paying attention to it, it immediately stopped. It started affecting her ability to remember and her ability to filter the things that she was saying and doing and things. And so then it gets into the classic, what we think of as senility, where somebody basically becomes a child and forgets the people they know, and forgets the things that they used to remember, and all that stuff classically happened to my mom. So my dad was lucky enough, but unfortunately very unlucky, in that he died very young of a heart attack. It was all of a sudden, he had all the medical attention he could have possibly wanted, but it was such a severe heart attack that there was nothing at the time that they could do for it. Since then, a lot of things have been worked out, but he was only 50 years old, and this is 1988, and yeah. Back then, we didn't even know about taking aspirin to thin your blood to help you in an emergency. But one of the reasons I became an EMT was because at the time, I didn't realize it, but at the time I found out that only 12% of people in the United States survived their first heart attack. That's a low number. That's a bad number. And I started looking into it, and within a couple of years, they started coming up with these things like aspirin. A person's having a heart attack, get them to chew aspirin, and it'll thin their blood and sometimes can clear up a heart attack. So it becomes like a scare or a wake-up call or whatever, or at least gets them to the point where they can get into the ER, and then the doctors start giving them the good stuff or whatever, which is now a lot more prevalent than what it was back then. So even at the time, they didn't have near as much stuff as you could get for, to get somebody out of the woods on a heart attack. So, Well, anyway, I think I hope I said everything I meant to say on this, but my memory, the reason I brought that up, I can still think enough, is that I'm 56 now. In the last 5 years, my memory and the ability to like hold a conversation and remember what I started talking about or whatever has really dropped. I actually am tracking it. It's not. I'm not letting it go. I've got a little book that is sort of like a little calendar where that every page I mark the date and I put a dot every in the on the book in the page every time I'm having a difficult time remembering something. And sometimes it's called like word search and things like that, where that you're having a conversation and you just can't remember a simple word or a simple thing. I used to manage an old folks home, and this fella one time was telling me that he had seen a black bear the day before in the old folks home, and what he meant was a black dog, but he couldn't make himself. And he was a brilliant man in his life. He had been a jet pilot and he was a colonel, and just highly intelligent. And so by this time, it was just frustrating him so much because he constantly did the word search thing, and you could tell that he was really upset on a real regular basis that he just couldn't have a conversation anymore. And I find myself in that situation quite a bit, and it's getting more difficult. Thankfully, it's not that bad yet, but it is tough when you're like this. When I wanted to expound on a point until other people would understand and be able to relate to it, and then by the time I get into the thing and it brings up a couple little subjects during the point which I would normally have used to help somebody identify with the situation or me or whatever. Now I get to a point often where where I forgot what the whole point was in the beginning. It's like you go into the kitchen, you're going to get something to eat, and you look in the cupboard for the milk, or you look in the refrigerator for the cereal or something like that. But it gets worse. We laugh about that as young people, but it gets worse. I mean, I luckily don't do that often. And if I do go into a room and forgot what I even went in there for, I mark it as a dot in that book. And then what I do is I look back a month or so, once in a while, and I go through the pages, and the whole point of the book is to see if it's progressing. And it doesn't seem to be progressing right now because there are things you can do about that. Certain vitamins and things like that. So anyway, today is a great example of where I started saying one thing and now I have fucking no idea what that was about. So anyway, and I made a post like 1 o'clock earlier, and now it's like 3:15. So apparently I'm addicted to this. Have a great day, everybody, and I hope you've enjoyed what your local idiot. I mean, at least I'm not drunk. Drunk people are hard to deal with. I speak drunkenese because I used to work in bars for a long time, but it's not that. It's just my personal retardation, which is, I mean, I wasn't exactly sharp originally. It's just gotten worse, a lot worse over the years. So I hope you have a great day. Bye.